male and female are equal, why in Islam women cannot lead prayer? There are no female prophets, and is there any ayah in the Quran that mentions about this difference in roles and functions? Okay. And also, just to follow that up, because I'm sure it's something that you show up, the question also goes into, has the Quran talk about, how is it different from today's education, female empowerment? Teens in the society taken too far. Is it the right path for a Muslim woman to be so independent from a man or a husband?
So let's start with the last part. Just take the example of Aisha radiallahu anha. In terms of education, she educated so many of the Sahaba. She carried a huge amount of knowledge because of her closeness to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she was the teacher of many of the Sahaba. So Islam never says no, don't teach ladies. Of course, they have the right to acquire knowledge, and many of the scholars of fiqh, they were women, subhanallah. And Ibn Taymiyyah, where did he get his name from? Because his teacher was a lady. So when it comes to ladies and they have the right to acquire knowledge, there is no limitation, subhanallah. And alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, nowadays, look at all the conferences. I am sure the female speakers are many more than the male speakers now. And alhamdulillah, they bring very beautiful perspective to each session they participate in, and the help forming the views in our Muslim society, and alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. So this is a great thing we have in Islam. What was the first one? I forgot.
So the first question, actually, there were several questions that discussed why a woman cannot be, for example, an imam or lead the prayer or a prophet. And then the question also goes into about, so a lot of counsel here, for example, that they say, a woman was never a prophet because of her because of her biology or because of her emotion. So, Sister Suzy, what do you think about that?
All right, Jazakallah khair. Again, these are very important questions, and questions that we do need to discuss and understand. But again, we often try to understand the Quran and our deen using human analogies that are rooted in modern sensibilities that have shifted our focus away from what our purpose in this dunya is. Our purpose in this dunya is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why has it only been in the last 20 years, 15 years maybe even, that this question of why can't the female be an imam come up to the surface? Because we've bought into a narrative that the person standing in the front of the row, the person leading, the person whose voice is heard, is more important in some way, has a closer connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in some way, has a level that is above in some way, when this is not what our deen teaches us. So when we talk about females and that sense of Qawamah, and that this was something that was asked in this question here, why is it only the males that are the leaders? I think many times we're misunderstanding that terminology. And we look to the example of Maryam alayha salam. Now Maryam alayha salam was tasked with a task that only a female could carry out. She was tasked with the carrying of a child that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed for her to carry. There is not a single male prophet that could have done what Maryam alayha salam did. There is not a single male prophet who is listed among the 4 chosen women who are chosen and promised Jannah. Because the female is not like the male. But this does not mean that the female is less than the male. It does not mean that the female, when she ascribes to the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which may be different than the commandments that are given to the male, that she is any less. And yet we begin to measure the metrics of what it means to be a female and what it means to be a male by what society tells us. The role of the imam leading salah There is nowhere in the Quran or the Hadith that says the Imam who leads the Salah is promised Jannah. But we have true and authentic narration that the mother, that Jannah lies at the feet of the mother. Should the father be angry? Should the father say, why does Jannah not lie at my feet? I work hard, I do Allah, I'm the leader. No, because the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is greater than any wisdom that we could have. And so the female has roles that are specified for the female. And when we look at our Islamic history, we look at examples such as the companions Ash-Shifa bint Abdullah, a companion's name that we often don't speak about. We speak about Umar and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhum and Ali. But Ash-Shifa bint Abdullah was a woman who at the time of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam had the knowledge and the instinct to heal the certain skin diseases, ant bites and things that people would suffer from. And so she approached the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam and she asked, is this healing something I can continue after taking the Shahada? And the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam appointed her as the official healer, a woman at a time when women by society were defined as less, not by the Quran, not by our deen. And Ash-Shifa bint Abdullah was the mother of two sons who became among the foremost narrators of hadith, was a mother of two sons who memorized the Quran in its entirety, was the wife of one of the companions, was a woman who after the death of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam under the Khalifa of Umar radiallahu anhu was appointed as the market comptroller, meaning the one who would stand in the market and decide whether the trade was ethical between the people who would trade. This is the women, these are the examples of the women of our Islamic history. Can anyone here tell me that Ash-Shifa bint Abdullah, who was a successful mother, a successful wife, a successful doctor essentially, a successful businesswoman, and a successful companion from among the companions of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, can anyone say that she was not a leader? Can anyone say that Ash-Shifa bint Abdullah was less than the Imam in the community who leads the Salah? Astaghfirullah. If we were to say that, we would be buying into a false narrative. A narrative of society today that keeps feeding us lies. That you are only a leader, you are only defined by your worth if you are in the public eye. You are only a leader if you get the title of sheikh. You are only a leader if you have those words associated with it. But when we return to the Quran, when we return to the Sunnah of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when we return to our Islamic history, when we know that Sumayya was the first martyr, a female who died for the sake of Allah, when we know the companions that surrounded the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the life of his own daughter Fatima radiallahu anha, when we begin to learn what a true Muslim woman is like, we will no longer ask these questions. Because we will know that what society has tried to feed us is a perversion of what our deen has taught us. We don't need those labels to get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We need to go back to our purpose, which is worshipping Him. And worshiping Him in the way that He has ascribed to us, not in the way that we think we should. Because when we start succumbing to the way we think we should do things, we start giving in to that nafs al-ammara, the basis self, the feeding of our desire, saying this feels good, this looks good, and so it must be good. And we've been given a guidance that is so much greater than that.
So we have about 5 minutes left, inshallah. I have two, I think, very important categories of questions, so we want to try to get through them, inshallah. So shifting back to the family, you both were talking about the importance of Qawamah within the family structure. So I have several questions here that talk about, well, it starts with, it is said that if a woman were to make sujood to anyone, it would be to her husband. So I have a set of questions here talking about obedience. And so if required to obey her husband, what does Qawamah look like in a family or marriage in the context of day-to-day, culminating in, do wives have to obey their husband's commands in the case of a disagreement where they cannot reach a compromise, and who really has the last say in the household?
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Obedience within the family structure is very clearly defined that no one can obey anyone in a matter that is considered disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the clear guidelines. However, there are things that may be in between, My view is that we should do this in this specific matter. No, my view is that we should do this in this specific matter. So men are asked to counsel for any family-related issue. Men, they will counsel as Qawamun, as the leaders of the family. Before making any decision, they will counsel with all family members, with the wife, with the children, and then they will take their input into consideration before making this decision. Suppose that they come up with a decision that the wife does not like. They are sincere enough and they really counsel and they really try to weigh the pros and cons for both sides, and then they decided something that the wife doesn't like. The wife should go with it and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make the khair in this decision. However, in the same time, I remind the brothers, the husbands, to please, when you make any decision, really take into consideration the input of the different family members and fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your decision. Don't do it because this is what you want. Do it because this is what is better for the family, and remember that it is a responsibility and it is going to be part of your either good deeds or bad deeds in the day of judgment, and will be asked for it. But it is better for the wife to go with the decision of the husband and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide them always to make the right decision, rather than breaking the family and make problems and conflicts that leads to a bad family atmosphere, which is not good for the whole family. Wallahu a'lam.
So, Sister Suzy, adding to that, there's another dimension that our audience members are asking about. They say the ayah 34 in Surah An-Nisa also talks about punishing women when they don't listen. So the ayah also mentions the concept of salihat and nushuz. So can you please elaborate more on this part of the ayah? And why is there usually no mention of them when these conversations take place?
Okay. Again, jazakumullahu khair for this question. An important question, and I think maybe a topic like this requires like a half-day seminar or something so that we can delve into all of these important questions. But we'll do our best, bi'Iznillah, within the constraints of the time that we have. The term nushuz, when you look at the root word of it, is actually the translation of it means to rise or rising. And many times that term nushuz in the Quran, again, when we're being selective and we try to take something out of context, we will not understand the meaning of it. And so it's often applied as when the woman disobeys her husband, then the husband can punish her. Yeah, again, do we truly understand what this concept of nushuz is and how it applies and what this sense means? Again, we translate the word as punishment. There's a beautiful lecture actually by a woman by the name of Sheikha Rima Yusuf. And yes, her title is Sheikha, so that's, again, another topic that we can speak about. But I would urge you all to look it up, in which she delves very deeply into the understanding of this particular verse and the terminology in it in context. But in a brief response to understanding this, again, when we look at the understanding of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his interactions, were there times in which there was a disagreement between him and his wives? Yes. And there is a documented time where the wives of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Medina had appointed Aisha radiallahu anha and Hafsa, who tended to be the daughter of Umar radiallahu anhu, who tended to be a little bit more vocal, had appointed them to go speak to the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam and say, we are now in a much better place financially than we were in Mecca. And yet, we don't really have much to show for it. And the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam was taken aback a little bit by this request, because he expected the mothers of the believers to give up that of the dunya for the akhirah. And so he responded in kind, and he said that he would give them time. And for 29 days, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam separated himself from the wives, because he was not happy with the request, because it was a difference in terms of opinion, like we spoke about yesterday. It was a moment in which someone may say, well, they are being disobedient. A'udhu billah. Of course, this is not anything we would ever say about the mothers of the believers. But again, if we're trying to understand it in today's context, we may be led to say, oh, well, they're making a request that falls outside of what they should be adhering to. And yet the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam's reaction is hajarhum, meaning he stepped away from them. He left them. He put space between himself and the wives. Now, many times when we raise our children today and when we look at books that speak about discipline and things like that, we look at the punishment, and I'm putting it in quotes here, as a timeout. So when your child, acts in a way that you don't want them to be acting, when your child disagrees, you give them a timeout. You give them that space. And many times when you look at modern psychology today, we see so many of the roots of modern psychology already existing in our Quran, already existing in the Sunnah of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so this concept of the timeout is not something new. But it is the idea that, again, we're putting punishment in quotes here, the idea that when there is a disagreement, when there is a nushuz, male or female, and this is another very critical point, that the nushuz, the rising or the uprising, essentially, as it can be described, is from the male or the female, there should be a distancing. Now again, I do want you to listen to that lecture. It's about an hour and a half long that explains in particular the terminology of daraba, where there is this constant going back and forth about, well, is a male allowed to hit the female as a spouse? And I will tell you emphatically, I will tell you absolutely, I will tell you over and over again, absolutely not. Our deen is a deen that stands against oppression. Our deen is a deen that stands against anything that does not show mercy in the relationship. And so if someone is going to take a verse from the Quran out of context and try to utilize it to justify an injustice, then they have acted against the hikmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, this is a deep topic that we can delve into much further, and inshallah maybe this is something for the future. We can have a longer seminar on the topic.